Welcome to CARICOMP Insider, where high-tech facial recognition meets real-world intelligence.
Sweden's parliament just voted to let police run live facial recognition on crowds in real time. The law takes effect July 2026. And buried inside it is a single loophole that could turn a narrow crime-fighting tool into something much broader. If you've ever walked past a security camera, at a train station, a shopping mall, a stadium, this story is about you. Because Sweden just became the first major EU country to explicitly pass a law authorizing this kind of surveillance. Not as a pilot program, not as a temporary measure, as statute. The political pressure behind it is real. Over the past 3 years, gang violence in Sweden has killed 23 bystanders and wounded 30 more in shootings that had nothing to do with the victims. Parents, commuters, people in the wrong place. That's the backdrop that made lawmakers say yes. The law limits live facial recognition to kidnapping, human trafficking, and other serious crimes. And it requires a court order before police can flip the system on. But what happens when the next crisis hits and those limits feel too slow? The answer might already be written into the law itself. Sweden's legislation says live facial recognition must be, their words, absolutely necessary. And a judge has to approve it first, except when it's urgent. In an emergency, police can activate the system without a court order, as long as they file an application within 24 hours after the fact. 24 hours. That means the surveillance happens first, and the oversight comes later. For anyone who's studied how emergency powers work in practice, that gap matters enormously. Because urgent is a judgment call, and judgment calls expand under pressure. Now, Sweden didn't do this in a vacuum. The EU AI Act already permits certain live biometric identification by law enforcement under narrow conditions, judicial safeguards, regulatory oversight, defined use cases. Sweden is essentially the first country to take that permission and build a full legal framework around it. They're the test case. If their safeguards hold, other EU nations will likely follow. If they don't, the precedent still exists, just without the guardrails anyone promised. And Europe is genuinely split on this. Cities like Amsterdam and Barcelona have banned public facial recognition outright. France and Germany require strict judicial oversight before any deployment. So Sweden isn't following a consensus. It's breaking one? Meanwhile, governance researchers who study this technology, including a peer-reviewed scoping review published in the journal Policing, draw a sharp line between two very different uses of facial comparison. Retrospective use means an investigator takes a photo from a crime scene and compares it against a database after the event. Live use means scanning faces in a crowd as people walk by, in real time, matching them against a watch list. Those two things sound similar, but they carry fundamentally different risk profiles. One is targeted, the other captures everyone. That distinction matters for detectives building a case. It also matters for every person whose face passes through a camera on the way to work. The researchers recommend minimum standards for any deployment: defined use cases, trained operators, full audit trails, and active error monitoring. Live systems, they argue, demand stricter accountability than retrospective ones, precisely because the stakes are higher and the margin for error is thinner. Sweden's law checks some of those boxes. But that emergency provision? It skips the most important one: prior judicial review. Across the Atlantic, the U.S. has no comparable federal framework at all. No national law says when police can or can't use live facial recognition. That's either an advantage, room to build something right, or a vulnerability, depending on which direction regulators move next. What Sweden's decision does is legitimize facial comparison as an investigative tool at the statutory level. For professionals who already use comparison-based methods on their own case files, matching a known photo against evidence they've collected, that's a meaningful distinction. Comparison means your photos, your case. Recognition means scanning strangers. Sweden's law just proved that difference matters legally and ethically. The uncomfortable truth is that Europe isn't saying no to facial recognition. It's saying yes, but only under conditions. And the real question isn't whether those conditions exist on paper. It's whether they survive the first political crisis that makes them feel inconvenient. Sweden passed a law that lets police scan faces in real time to fight kidnapping and trafficking. The law requires a judge to sign off, unless it's urgent, in which case police act first and ask permission later. That 24-hour gap between action and oversight is where the future of this technology will be decided. Whether you investigate cases for a living or you're just someone who walks past cameras every day, the same question applies. Who's watching, and who's watching them? The full story is in the description if you want the deep dive.
Now you know something most people in this industry don't. Use it. And when you're ready to put it to work, caracomp.com. We'll see you tomorrow.